In this video, I'm going to be going over something you didn't know about every single boss in Ark Survival Evolved, and also since there's only like 20 something bosses in Ark, I'm going to be giving you 5 facts instead of 1 for each one. But anyway, let's get into it. Number 1 starting out is the Broodmother, and this was the first boss ever added to Ark, and originally when Ark came out, it was the only boss you could fight. And number 2 is it also used to spawn in the open. It didn't have its own arena, so if you wanted to fight it, it would basically spawn at the Obelisk terminals, and you had to fight it there. And that leads into number 3, which people would actually use this to destroy people's bases in PvE by leading it to their bases, which I find pretty funny. You could probably also do this in PvP too, but it worked in PvE as well. Number 4 is it gives less element than the Megapithecus, despite being harder than the Megapithecus. This is because technically, I guess, you're supposed to fight the Broodmother first, then the Megapithecus and Dragon, but Megapithecus is way easier. And number 5 is, according to the wiki, you could actually pick up the Broodmother back when it was still, like, spawned in the wild, which I find kind of funny. I couldn't really find much proof of this, but I'd like to know if anyone who played back then actually knew about this, because I just learned about it from the wiki, and I'm curious to see if anyone else actually, like, experienced this. Moving on to the Megapithecus, and at number 6 is in the Explorer notes, Mei Yin used a Giga to kill the Megapithecus, which in Ark is impossible because you can't bring Gigas to the arena, and I understand why, because you could literally kill it in like 5 seconds if you could, but still, it doesn't make sense that they can do it in the lore. I mean, I guess it kind of makes sense because it doesn't really matter, it's part of the story, but whatever. Number 7 is the Megapithecus can be found on 6 maps. It can be found on the Island, the Center, Valguero, Genesis Part 1 and 2, and Fjordur, which is quite a lot of maps for one boss. And number 8 is the hole. If you fall into this hole in the arena, you will instantly die, and your creature will die as well and disappear, and you'll lose all your stuff. So if you haven't done this boss fight before, don't fall in the hole no matter what you do. Number 9 is if you force tame it, you can't really use any of the abilities other than the rock throw, and then you can actually move like side to side, which is kind of weird, but you can't do like the jump or the roll or spin or attack or anything it has. And number 10 is the rocks it threw used to insta-kill you back when it first came out, and for a while, so I'm glad they removed that because it made it way harder, because, you know, if you just got hit by it once, it would go straight through your mount and then instantly kill you. And number 11 is the Dragon. This one can actually fly underwater, which doesn't really make too much sense, but I mean, it looks kind of interesting, I guess. And it just flies at completely normal speed. And number 12 is the X-Dragon. This was a variant of the dragon found on Genesis Part 1. Well, you actually couldn't find it, as it was going to be in some sort of mission, but I guess they ended up scrapping it, and now it doesn't even let me really spawn it in. I had the spawn code on there, maybe it'll work for you, but I've tried it a few times recently and it hasn't worked. And number 13 is you can actually find the dragon on 4 different maps, which is the Island, Fjordur, Valguero, and Ragnarok, which isn't as many as the Megapithecus, but it's still a decent amount. And then at number 14, it's herbivores actually take less damage from the dragon than carnivores do, making them pretty good, especially the woolly rhino and the therizinosaur. And at number 15 is the magmasaur. This thing actually doesn't take the fire damage from the dragon, which is the biggest danger in that fight, meaning these things are actually pretty good. But the problem is you can't really bring that many of them because they're so big, but you can actually bring them in this fight. And number 16 is the Overseer, and this one was added to the island about 2 years after the game actually came out. So the final boss for the island was added 2 years later, so it was quite a bit. It was added like with the release of the game in 2017. And at number 17 is you can actually see Aberration in the background, which of course some of you guys might know, but this was actually before Aberration came out, and I remember this was kind of like a tease to the new map that was coming out, Aberration. I think this might have been right after they dropped the trailer for it, so it was pretty cool to be able to see that. Number 18 is the Overseer is like pretty much the only one of the main bosses not to have a flag, which I think kind of sucks because I think a flag would actually look really cool with this thing, just having it on there. Could have some pretty cool design, but I guess we'll never see that. And similarly, number 19 is it also doesn't have a head, which I guess kind of makes a little bit more sense, but there's been some other things that also have heads that don't really fit, so I feel like it'd be kind of cool. And number 20 is the Overseer was the first ever boss to have a cutscene. And of course we'd see more cutscenes with bosses years later, but this was the first ever one, and it's still a pretty cool one to this day. Moving on to the Manticore, number 21, it has the lowest health out of any of the main bosses, but it does have a resistance to damage, so it actually, I guess, would have similar health if you take in the resistance, but it still has the lowest health stat out of any boss, not including mini bosses. Number 22 is it rarely lands if you bring flyers into the arena. So if you were to bring a mix of, say, Wyverns and Rexes, then it would like never land, basically. If you bring a single flyer, it's not going to land. So if you do want to bring flyers to the arena, you need to make sure to bring all flyers and not any land creatures. And if you're going to bring land creatures, make sure to do an entire army of land creatures so it has more you know, the chance to actually land. And number 23 is the cutscene that the Manticore has. Was added 6 years after Scorched Earth came out, so it took them a little bit, and ended up being the last cutscene in the game, despite not being the last ever map. I remember for the longest time, I think pretty much everyone in the ARK community just thought that this map was never going to get a cutscene, but eventually, the end of 2022, it ended up getting one. Number 24 is in the Ragnarok arena. It actually summons griffins instead of deathworms. In the Scorched Earth arena, it summons golems and deathworms, and on Rag, it summons golems and griffins. And in number 25 is this is actually the only guardian to give you like a cutscene. Normally, it's always like overseers or some other type of boss. The guardians are the ones like the dragon, Broodmother, and Megapithecus that are kind of just like not the main bosses, but kind of smaller bosses, even though they are still pretty strong. But for some reason, this one gives it to you, even though I guess Scorched Earth is also, like, in the Explorer notes, they talk about having an Overseer, so it just sounds like they didn't want to have to make an Overseer for Scorched Earth, which kind of sucks, which means I guess we'll probably never get that. And number 26 is the voice lines for Rockwell were added 5 years after the original release. If you played during this time, then you probably know this, but if you are newer, you might not have known that he didn't have voice lines before. And then, unlike the cutscene from Scorched Earth, no one was really asking for this. The reason they did it is because in later maps, of course, they had Rockwell, and they had David Tennant voicing him in the newer ones, so they went back and added voice lines for David Tennant. I'm not sure how I feel about it. I like it in the newer maps, but I feel like I kind of liked it when he wasn't talking in the older Rockwell fight before. Number 27 is you can't summon Rockwell at an obelisk, which means you can't spawn any bosses at an obelisk and aberration, making this like pretty much the only map where the obelisk doesn't really do much on aberration other than make tech items. Number 28 is Rockwell is actually the largest creature in the game. It's just a little bit bigger than the King Titan, but you can't really tell, I feel like, just because the arena it's set in, you don't realize how big he actually is. Number 29 is Rockwell is the Overseer of Aberration. Just like the Overseer on the island, Rockwell basically controls the entirety of Aberration. And once you kill him, I guess it makes sense that you get the cutscene moving on to the next map. And number 30 is Rockwell actually returns 2 times in future maps in Genesis Part 1 and 2, and of course we'll get to those later in the video. Now we're moving on to the Titans. First off with the Ice Titan, and number 31 is the 4th largest creature in the game, which is pretty massive. And then at number 32 is you actually used to be able to keep it alive with kibble. If you don't know, when you tame the Ice Titan or any of the Titans, they only last for 24 hours because they'd be super overpowered. If you couldn't, I mean, they still are pretty overpowered, but you could actually use kibble to keep them alive when they first came out. And at number 33 is the Ice Titan is the only Titan to not have minions, which I find kind of odd now that I think about it. But after that, at number 34 is the icon for the Ice Titan. It actually doesn't really look like the Ice Titan at all. There's a few creatures in Ark that look like this, but this is like one of the only bosses that has this. I mean, it has this horns and stuff, but like that fur on the top isn't there in the real one, or at least it's not as large. Number 35 is the first announced Titan. So basically, the Ice Titan was the first ever Titan revealed with the original Extinction teaser trailer, and I remember being extremely hyped for that trailer when it came out. And onto the Desert Titan. At 36, it's the only boss in the entire game that cannot land. The other flying bosses do have the ability to land, but this one just can't land at all, and it will be permanently in the air, which I think is pretty cool. And number 37 is when, if the Bloodstalker first came out, you could actually pull it with the webs according to the wiki, which I would have loved to see that. Number 38 is you can harvest the flock, even though you can't see it. It just gives you hide and meat, which is kind of lame, but I mean, I don't know what you'd expect. It's still kind of funny you can harvest the invisible body, though. And number 39 is you can fly underwater with the Desert Titan, so you can actually go like swim underwater and stuff with it. And number 40 is you can land on the wings when you're actually fighting it, which is also quite funny. You can use like wyverns and stuff and just land on top of it. And going to the Forest Titan at number 41, it is the 5th largest creature in the game. Just a little bit smaller than the Ice Titan. I mean, I think it's taller, but when it comes to size, the Ice Titan is bigger. And then at number 42 is you can actually destroy these redwood trees in the sunken forest biome with the Forest Titan. All you gotta do is walk up to them and then they'll get crushed, which normally you can't destroy them with hatchets and stuff. I don't think it works with regular redwood trees on any other map, but with the Extinction ones it does. And number 43 is the Forest Titan is like one of the only Titans other than the King Titan to actually have a role in the Explorer notes. I believe the Ice Titan and Desert Titans aren't really mentioned or are a big part of the story when it comes to those. And number 44 is this boss is like the only boss to have minions that actually help you. You can basically just like ride on them without having to do anything, and then you can go attack the Forest Titan with them, which is kind of interesting. And number 45 is the Forest Titan is also one of the only Titans, or at least the smaller Titans, to have a death animation, which not many creatures in Ark do, because they usually just ragdoll. Now moving on to the King Titan, and number 46 is in the Explorer notes. This thing was actually stabbed in the chest with the Mega Mech, but you can't see that when you fight it, so it either healed or I guess you just don't see it in the game. I feel like it would have been a cool detail to have it like have a giant scar on his chest. Number 47 is this is the second largest creature in the game. Usually thought of to be the first. I mean, I usually thought it was the biggest, but I guess technically the Rockwell is a little bit bigger. According to the wiki, it's like 5 meters taller, which is pretty close, but still pretty cool. And number 48 is this the only boss in the game that requires heads of itself to fight, which means you, in order to fight the upper difficulties, you have to fight the lower difficulties of it, which no other really boss has that requirement. Number 49 is another Explorer Note related thing, but they actually were allowed to use the Mega Mech, or they used the Mega Mech to fight the normal variants of it, even though in Arc you can only use the Mega Mech against the Alpha King Titan. And number 50 is you can't kill the King Titan with the kill gun that in creative mode, which normally you could kill everything in one shot. This will just bring it down to 1 health and won't kill it immediately. Moving on to Moder, number 51 is it is one of the 5 master AIs, even though this is the only one they actually put in the game. Technically, every single biome in Genesis Part 1 is supposed to have its own master AI, but the only one that actually has one is the ocean biome with the Moder. Number 52 is Moder is the 3rd largest creature in the entire game, just behind the King Titan and Rockwell. And number 53 is the minions actually have health bars, which I believe is like the only minion to actually have health bars, making them technically like a mini boss of their own, even though they're not that hard at all. But after that, at number 54 is Moder is mother in Dutch. So if you've ever wondered why it's called that, that is why. But at number 55 is Moder is also the only underwater boss in the entire game, and I don't think we'll get any other underwater bosses, even though it would be kind of cool. Now moving on to the Master Controller, number 56, this is the second time Rockwell appears as a boss, because the Master Controller is just the AI version of Rockwell. But in number 57 is you can actually find the Master Controller in Genesis Part 2 as well, in one of the, I believe it's the Star Dolphin mission, you can see him. Number 58 is there were 2 minions that were cut from the boss fight, the VR Daedon and Yudi. You can still spawn them in, but they're not really finished yet, so their model looks a little bit weird, but they were going to be in the boss fight, but I'm kind of glad they weren't, because I don't know if they would have fit. Number 59 is they didn't change his voice at all. In Rockwell, like, they changed his voice to David Tennant, but they didn't change this version of him, which I'm glad they didn't, because I liked the kind of deeper voice he had in this one. And in number 60 is the arena is actually in the center of the Genesis Part 1 map, and if you use Ghost Mode, you can fly to it just by going in between any of the biomes if you look on the map there. Moving on, we have Rockwell Prime, and number 61 is the regular version of him, only has 75k health, which I guess would make it lowest and not the Manticore, which I said earlier, but to be fair, this one is multiple different stages of the boss fight, so... And also the 75k health isn't really like accurate because it has a huge number of resistance, so it takes way less damage. And number 62 is you can actually see Arc 2, the planet that it's going to take place on, in the background of the final boss fight here. Once you get into phase 2 of the boss fight, it'll kind of come out of hyperspeed and you can see the planet back there. Number 63 is all of the Rockwell variants cannot move, which I find kind of interesting because I believe those are the only bosses that can't move, and yet it's just all the Rockwell variants that are immobile. Not even like the AI version of them can move, which is kind of odd, or I guess interesting that it's just hit it. Number 64 is the size. This one's actually smaller than the first version of Rockwell, which I guess kind of makes sense because this version of Rockwell takes up the entire ship, but as you can see, this is it compared to the Ice Titan. Still pretty big, but not insanely massive. And number 65 is this is the 3rd time that you have to fight Rockwell, making it like the most returning boss when it comes to the story bosses. But number 66, going on to the Ice Worm Queen, is it's just a reskinned Alpha Deathworm. It's not a bad thing, as this was a nice little mini boss, but it still is just the blue version of the Alpha Deathworm. And then number 67 is this thing is actually taller than a Titanosaur, which is kind of funny since this is a mini boss, and yet it's still bigger than a lot of the main bosses like the Broodmother and Megapithecus. Number 68 is if you go to the back of the arena, there's kind of like a Giga you can find, and it's actually like still alive, and you can find it breathing and stuff, which is a cool little detail. Number 69 is the Ice Worm Queen, was the first ever mini boss. Well, this and one other that were added in the same update, but this was like basically the first mini boss in Arc. And number 70 is, even though it's an alpha, you can't get Chibi XP from it. You can see the alpha glow, but you can't get the Chibi XP, which if you don't know, Chibis, in order to give them XP, you need to kill alphas. Moving on to the Lava Golem number 71, is this was the other first mini boss. This and the Ice Storm Queen were added in the same update, making them both the first ever mini bosses in Ark. Number 72 is it actually gives an alpha boost to creatures around it, which is kind of odd because it's not an alpha, but I guess technically it is because it gives an alpha boost, so I don't really know. Number 73 is there's actually the fire animation under it. If you take it out of the area where it normally is, you just think it's kind of just on fire from being in the lava, but that fire animation is always there. Number 74 is actually really big. You can see compared to a Titanosaur, it stands up as almost tall as one, making it once again bigger than like the Broodmother and stuff. And number 75 is this was actually the first of the two different lava variants. There was the X Golem added in Genesis Part 1, but of course this one was added before, and I think the X Golem was kind of an improvement when it comes to the looks. It just looks pretty dope, but of course this was added years before. Moving on to the DOTA Rex number 76 is it's actually tameable in certain events. In Fear Evolved you can't tame it, it's just a boss, but in some events you can actually tame it by crafting it in a cooking pot and you'll be able to keep it for 30 minutes. Number 77 is it's actually a fan-made creature. This was the original dossier that a fan made, and I guess the developers liked it so much that they decided to put it in the game, which is a cool little detail. Number 78 is this one was actually in 5 different events: the Turkey Child, the Fear Evolved, the Winter Wonderland, the Easter event, and the Anniversary event. So this one's been in quite a few of the Ark's events. And number 79 is you can always get the Genesis 2 variant of it, because it actually is in one of the missions there as a boss, and then you can actually use that to spawn it in and force tame it. And number 80 is you can actually tame the Zomdodos that it has, and once you do, you can claim them and keep them forever. So if you did manage to get one of these during those events, you still be able to keep them. And number 81 is the DOTA Wyvern. Moving on, as this one actually spawns up to level 185, and if it does spawn that high, then it actually has more health than the King Titan, apparently, as I've heard, which I imagine would be quite an insane fight. But this one's also a world boss, and you could pretty much bring anything you want, and you could kill turrets, so I guess that does make it easier. Still, 185 is an insanely high level. Number 32 is you can actually put the mask you get from the DOTA Wyvern and the DOTA Rex 2 on the trophy heads and wear them. I guess you can wear them as a mask, or you can put them on the trophy base. At number 83 is the DOTA Wyvern has all 3 breath attacks from the original Scorched Earth Wyverns: the fire, the lightning, and the poison breath, which also makes it pretty deadly. And at number 84 is you can tame these zombie wyverns as well, and you can ride them too. They were made rideable in a later version of Fear Evolved, and you could keep them too. They are a little bit smaller than regular wyverns, but you can find them at insanely high levels. I believe it's up to like level 400, which is quite good. And at number 85, unlike the DOTA Rex, you cannot tame them, and they've never been tameable in any event, which kind of sucks, as being able to tame the DOTA Rex was pretty fun. Kind of wish you were able to tame this one. Moving on to the Crystal Wyvern Queen at number 86, this was the first ever custom boss for a custom map, excluding those little like mini bosses and stuff, but this one was actually a really cool addition, and they started doing that ever since, which was a nice change. And number 87 is the Dermis is missing the skull that it normally has on its head. It does have the crystals and stuff on its back too, which is good, I guess. And number 88 is it has all 3 of the crystal breasts. Similar to how the DOTA Wyvern has all of the breasts from the regular wyverns, this one has all the breasts from the Crystal Wyvern variants. Number 89 is there's a 4th hidden version of the Crystal Wyvern Queen. The differences I noticed is this one is orange, which is kind of just like the default base version you can spawn in, and it has 100,000 health and spawns at level 1, so it's kind of different but kind of the same. Number 90 is it is actually the same size as the DOTA Wyvern. Now, I can't really have any footage of this because you can only spawn the DOTA Wyvern during the events, but I believe I've done it before, and they are the same size, which I guess makes sense because they are giant wyvern bosses, pretty much the same, so still kind of cool. And number 91 is this one has no boss music at all. Usually some of the custom maps will like reuse boss music, but this one doesn't have any boss theme at all. It just plays some like generic battle music, which kind of sucks because I always like loved listening to the awesome battle music this game has. But at number 92 is it's actually like the largest arena you could get, ignoring like the King Titan one because that one's a world boss. The actual arena you teleport to, this one is absolutely massive. And at number 93 is this one has the same death sound as the Megapithecus. Number 94 is if you kill the alpha variant of it, you get a custom Dinopithecus costume skin, which is quite interesting to look at, to say the least. And number 95, if you force tame and ride this thing, it'll actually make your character massive, and as you can see, it is just humongous, which I mean makes sense because it's just going off the regular Dinopithecus size, but it's still funny. And moving on to Baya at number 96, as it was the first mini boss added since 2017. This map came out in 2022, so we went about like 5 years without having a mini boss on one of these custom maps, or any other map, excluding like the missions and stuff. Number 97 is in the mod version of Fjordur. This entire area was like black, and the entrance to the cave was black and it was full of cobwebs. This was because at number 98 it was actually a different boss in the mod variant, as it was a boss called Itsy and Bitsy, and it was two like reskinned Broodmothers that were a little bit smaller than the Broodmother, I think, which is quite interesting. I think I like the Baya a little bit more though. And number 99 is Baya is just an upscaled reskin B, but it's not a bad thing, as a B boss is kind of cool, and it's also the largest B variant in the entire game, as there's actually quite a few B variants, especially like the ones on Crystal Isles and stuff. And now on to Steinborn, which number 101 is that actually looked different in the mod version as well. They kind of changed the look of it, and the face, I believe, was like had a lot more rocks and stuff on it, and there's a lot more noticeable crystals. I don't know, it was a little bit different. And number 102 is you can actually kind of like cheese this if you bring a Velonosaur, and you can actually damage it quite a bit. I mean, it's not a super easy strat, but it is pretty good. And number 103 is if you put it on a Dermis, all of the rocks and crystals go away, so kind of just looks like this, which, I mean, you could still tell it's different than a normal Dire Bear, but it still kind of sucks. Number 104 is an interesting one, because on the wiki it says that you can harvest this thing for meat and hide, but when I tried, it doesn't give you anything, so I don't know, it's kind of weird. Number 105 is it does have spawn these minions called the Rubble Bears, which are basically just a bunch of rocks floating together. I've always found this one quite interesting as another weird Dire Bear variant. And then we have Hotti Skull. Number 106 is this is actually the second Fenrir boss in this map. On Fjordur, there's two different ones. I guess three if you consider Hotti Skull two different bosses. Number 107 is there's actually no cave, meaning this is the only mini boss in the game that doesn't have a cave you have to go through, which actually would mean it's probably one of the easiest, because you can bring literally anything you want because there's no restrictions in the cave. So you could just kill this thing in seconds with Gigas if you really wanted to. And number 108 is this used to actually be a direwolf in the modded version of Fjordur before it came to official. It's quite interesting to see what it used to look like. I definitely like the Fenrir's variants a lot more, as they're a lot more intimidating than the old direwolves that they used to be. And at number 109 is this one would actually be a mid-sized Fenrir, because we have a larger one in Fenrir Sulfur as the boss later, and then there's the regular Fenrir, which is smaller than both of these. And then, of course, this is the only boss to actually have two bosses, or I guess be a double boss fight. Excluding, I guess, the ones where they put the same bosses from other maps, like the center where they have the Broodmother and Megapithecus. But this is the first time they actually like made two custom bosses and put them both in the same, and then had them as its own custom boss fight, which I think is quite interesting. And it's definitely better than just having two of the same bosses put into one boss fight. And moving on to Fenrir Sulfur, number 111 is this was the last boss to ever be added to Ark Survival Evolved, and there's definitely not going to be any other new bosses, which is kind of sad, but I mean, their arc has ended. Maybe we'll get some new bosses in there, hopefully. At number 112, according to the wiki, Fenrir Sulfur has the second highest health in the game, just right behind the Alpha King Titan, which is quite insane, meaning this one is actually a pretty beefy boss. And number 113 is it has an attack that will insta-kill you, kind of like the old Megapithecus rock throw, except for this one still does actually insta-kill you. Number 114 is the boss music is the same music from the Ragnarok boss fight, which is not a bad thing, as that one is an absolute banger. And number 115, if you kill the alpha variant, you will get Mjolnir, but you won't be able to use it because you have to be level 120. Or no, not 120, what I'm talking about. It's like 195, which is absolutely ridiculous. But once you do get it, you can just throw it around and kill stuff with it, which is kind of fun. But that is going to be it for this video. Also, I didn't include the mini boss from the missions, mainly because I guess I don't really think of the missions mainly as bosses. Also, the main reason I just couldn't really find anything super interesting about them, especially 5 ones about them, so I didn't really think it was worth including those small little mission fights. But yeah, that's going to be it for this video. If you guys did enjoy, make sure to leave a like and also subscribe. Thanks for watching, and bye.